Hello freaks and geeks, my name is Devil's Advocate, and today I'll be doing a guest video in place of Tyler Preston, and I want to thank him for allowing me to do this video. For those of you who are unfamiliar with me, and I imagine a lot of you are not, I do videos that would get me labeled a coon, an Uncle Tom, a misogynist, and a hater of all the children's. Yeah, I'm a shitlord, and I call myself the shadow broker of red pills for a reason. Today we'll be discussing a nasty little elephant in the room, and that is intersectionality. Now, in case you don't know what intersectionality means, let me explain. First, we have to consider what some in the social justice arena define as oppression. This is the idea that there are some people who experience adversities not because of personal choices and failures, but because their skin isn't the right shade, what is between their legs and attached to a gender identity is seen as less than desirable, and so on and so forth. Those ideas are silly because every one of those so-called oppressions could potentially be summed up as someone making ridiculous assumptions about another person's life based on nothing more than a presumption of a sob story. Now here comes intersectionality. You see, with this concept, all of those oppressions that could have been self-inflicted, all those oppressions that could be non-existent, are now turned into super oppressions that supposedly intersect and overlap, and then amplify as if forms of so-called oppression are like the Avengers. Or better yet, they're like Power Rangers, who combine their giant dinosaurs of oppression together to form the Megazord of oppression. Intersecting and overlapping. Sounds like a sexual position, but trust me, even sex cannot match this level of fuckery. So then what is my big issue with intersectionality? Glad you asked. We'll be looking at some of the biggest issues, and of course these are not all the issues, and why those issues can be a bit of a headache to those of us who aren't completely insane. Give that cancer some good old-fashioned chemo. Now, for the first descent into madness, we can see that intersectionality is a very broad concept. You get to include people who are clearly troubled by their own choices, but still get an oppression card because reasons. A good example of this is the fat positive movement. These people actually believe that being fat is not only a huge problem for everyone else to be concerned with, as if it is their problem and their fault, but they also believe that being fat is a form of oppression. Remember the TLC show My 600 Pound Life? If you don't, then just imagine the largest people you've ever seen in your life making excuse after excuse as to how and why they are so huge. And then just imagine TLC playing the sad music in the backdrop to try to convince us to feel sorry for them. Some would call that oppression. Some would consider those people to be less advantaged than others. Now, some of you may not see the issue with this, but think for a second. If these people are really oppressed, then how would one explain how they are able to afford enough food to end up being as large as the universe in the first place? Wouldn't oppressed people be, I don't know, so poor that they couldn't be as fat as these people are? But you see, I use that example to illuminate one of the aspects of intersectionality that is about as ridiculous of a concept as one could imagine. There is an absolute alleviation and complete disregard for one's own responsibility with their own destiny. Without the idea that one cannot be responsible for their own situation in life, then you essentially cannot have intersectionality. Without the concept of, this is not my fault, it's the system's fault, it's society's fault, it's that guy's fault, it's this girl's fault, it's everybody's fault but my own, we could easily look at a whale of a person and say that they are responsible for their own weight gain. Now you may be thinking, but Devil, some people are black and they didn't eat themselves into having darker skin. My response to that would be a rather simple one. If those people are black and they face some adversities in life, then chances are those situations are self-inflicted and not a result of a society oppressing them or simply being disadvantaged. The unintended consequence of intersectionality is the avocation of abandoning one's own agency in order to fit some ridiculous description of oppression. If you've ever ran into someone talking about intersectionality as if it is a thing, you'll notice they'll blame society for everything when it comes to oppression. The one thing you need to remember is that it is never the fault of the supposed oppressed person, but always the fault of another without that same disadvantage. For example, if women earn less than men, and damn, I don't want to talk about the fucking wage gap, then of course that is the fault of men and sexism. It isn't the result of women making different life choices, it is all always sexism. That's the only option people like this will accept. If black people are disproportionately arrested more often, then it isn't the fact that blacks commit more crimes, and that would go a long ways to explain it, but that those damn racist white cops are to blame, despite those same white cops gunning down whites more often. Do you see the problem with those two? Personal choices are never considered, or in other words, what led up to those conclusions is not considered, but just the result. Sound familiar? Sounds almost like equality of outcome, doesn't it? That is one of the main reasons why those of us who disregard this nonsense say that people who advocate for intersectionality in politics and policies are actually pushing for not equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome. If that is not the case, then one would have to explain why they seem to be so fixated on outcomes versus what led to an outcome. When you apply this way of thinking as a one-size-fits-all sort of oppression Olympics, what you're going to run into are the people who don't fit the narrative, but one would assume they would. For example, if you happen to be a white male, or in some cases a male in general, then it is as if you don't matter or you cannot understand what a woman goes through. In other words, someone who is a poor white male could be told that they have white privilege, and a middle class or even rich black woman who believes in intersectionality would have no issue telling that white male that they cannot be racist towards them. Do you see the problem here? It's that individual circumstances and the actions of that individual does not matter as much as the narrative. Here, let me give you an example of that. This is Bahar Mustafa. In case you don't know who she is the woman who said this.
Furthermore, there have been charges made against me that I am racist and sexist to white men. I want to explain why this is false. I, an ethnic minority woman, cannot be racist or sexist towards white men because racism and sexism describe structures of privilege based on race and gender. And therefore women of colour and minority genders cannot be racist or sexist, since we do not stand to benefit from such a system.
See what I mean now? She's using intersectionality as a weapon to shield her from criticism. And the sad part is there are more than one Bahar Mustafas out there. She's just a blatant example. And the thing is, this type of mindset is growing. So as you saw in the clip just now, she's using intersectionality as not only a weapon but a shield from her own bigotry. And if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what will. The other concerning part about this is that people out there have positions of power where they can utilize intersectionality as a weapon and as a shield. They can openly discriminate against white people or men or anyone for that matter, because once they lure you in with the candy of love, then you're trapped. Once you're indoctrinated, they can keep shifting the goalposts and they can take over whatever movement they want to take over. Let me give you a quick example. Now, in case you don't know who that is Alicia Garza. She's one of the people, one of the 3 women who started Black Lives Matter. And this woman has no issue talking about gay people and talking about the LGBT community, but then will turn around and call certain segments of that community privileged because of skin color or gender. This is a problem with intersectionality. It's very subjective. Some people want to be the arbiter of truth when it comes to that. And Alicia Garza is no exception to that rule. Let me show you what I mean by that. This comes from an article in Metro Weekly in Alicia Garza's own words. She says, quote, "All white people have privilege, but it doesn't mean that all white people have the same amount of privilege or the same degree of privilege. And privilege is really just access. You can get access based on your skin color, but be really poor and be from Appalachia, but in a different context. Because you're white, you have access to opportunities and resources and assets that a person who's not visibly white doesn't have. And there's been millions and millions of studies that lay this out. You can be a white person who's part of another marginalized or disenfranchised group, like you could be a white gay person and still have privilege and also experience oppression." End quote. Do you see what's happening here? She is dividing people based off of her interpretation of privilege. And she's saying even if you are a poor white person, you have privilege. So again, that only proves my case of what I said before. You could be a poor person and be compared to a rich or middle class black woman, and somehow you still have white privilege. Can you not see the insanity of this? In closing, people who use this idea of intersectionality, as I have demonstrated, will use it as both a sword and a shield, and also as a cannon to marginalize people who they simply don't like. Intersectionality is cancer. But hopefully now that I have shown you the problems and the meaning of intersectionality, you, the audience, can be the chemo. I want to thank Tyler Preston again for having me on his channel. And remember folks, always be the devil in the details.